Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome to Avid Online, our platform launched as a direct response to the pandemic on the 1st of April 2020 to continue to bring to our audiences the very best of the arts and culture, staying true to our mantra, as always, that learning never stops. For those who are joining us for the first time, a very special welcome. Please refer to the chat box for more information on Avid Learning, our partners for this evening's discussion. Over the years, Avid has partnered with the Consulate General of Canada in Mumbai to support the International Day of the Girl Child. That focuses attention on the need to address the challenges girls face to promote girls' empowerment and fulfillment of their human rights. We have collaborated with the Consulate to present especially curated discussions like the one we have today, and also light up our buildings pink in solidarity of the campaign. To tell us more about the International Day of the Girl Child, please welcome the Deputy High Commissioner of Canada to India, Ananditas Story. Welcome, Deputy High Commissioner.
Good evening, bonjour, and namaste to everyone. We are delighted to be here today with Avid Learning and FICCI to present today's program, Women Create for Change, Stories of Empowerment, to celebrate the International Day of the Girl Child, as we engage with key speakers and practitioners in a meaningful discussion to learn about their journey of empowerment through the arts. It is an honor to be with you today, and I'd like to thank Asad and Avid Learning for curating this program. In today's panel, we have two speakers that we've been delighted to partner with in recent times. The High Commission of Canada in New Delhi worked closely with Maina Mukherjee on the Engendered Human Rights Film Festival in 2020 to present Canadian films and thought-provoking panels. While the Consulate General of Canada in Mumbai has collaborated regularly with Quasar Takor Padamsi on TESPO Youth Theatre Festival to present workshops led by women theatre practitioners. The arts are an incredible tool to inspire, raise awareness, and catalyze social change in our societies. When we look at art and culture led by and created by women, they not only bring to attention issues that women face, but they also create a space for discussion. They invite questions about social inequalities, and they encourage dialogue on how we can overcome these challenges. Empowering adolescent girls and ensuring the full realization and enjoyment of their human rights is critical to the achievement of gender equality and making families and countries more prosperous. On the global stage, Canada has been a leading advocate for adolescent girls, including spearheading the creation of this International Day of the Girl Child in 2011. And we've increased efforts to support adolescent girls across numerous areas, including health, education, humanitarian assistance, and the elimination of sexual and gender-based violence. Investment in girls during adolescence, particularly for the most vulnerable, has transformative impacts on health, education, and economic outcomes for themselves, their families, their communities, and their countries. Girls are powerful agents for change, and they need to be included as full participants in decisions that affect their lives and in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We need to ensure that they have the right tools and the opportunities to make a difference. Canada's cultural and creative industries are a vibrant part of our economy and of our national identity. Our artists, producers, composers, and technicians are world leaders in their fields. The Government of Canada's Creative Canada policy is a vision and approach to the creative industries to grow the creative economy. This vision, however, cannot be achieved without a commitment to diversity and inclusion, including gender parity. To strive for greater gender parity in all of its initiatives and to support the creative industries, the Department of Canadian Heritage has integrated Gender-Based Analysis Plus, or GBA Plus analysis, across its activities, programs, and services. This includes commitments by Telefilm Canada and the National Film Board of Canada to build a more representative and diversified portfolio that represents Canada's population, and their aim to achieve gender parity in key technical roles and creative positions. I am proud of the partnership seen today, and I'm excited to hear from this panel of inspirational speakers and practitioners on how the arts have been a key enabler in the journey of empowerment in India. In Mumbai, the Consulate General of Canada has collaborated with civil society to light up a number of heritage buildings and institutions in pink to mark support for the International Day of the Girl Child. We are thrilled to have our partners at Avid Learning join us yet again in this public awareness campaign by lighting up the iconic Royal Opera House, as well as the SR House in Mumbai. Do keep an eye out on Monday, October 11th to see some of Mumbai's iconic buildings lit up in pink. Thank you again. Merci. Dhanyavad.
Thank you, Amanda, for those wonderful remarks and also for spearheading such a wonderful initiative for now over a decade. And we've collaborated with you for several years on this, and we're delighted to have the opportunity to do so again. And so that brings me to our evening's discussion. Women create for change, stories of empowerment. A discussion that features inspirational speakers, mentors, practitioners who come together to speak about how the arts have been a key enabler in their journey of empowerment. Presented by the Consulate General of Canada in Mumbai and FICCI Flow and Avid Learning. We're delighted to present our speakers. Allow me to introduce them and give them a warm virtual welcome. Author and journalist Anandita Ghosh, performing artist, singer and songwriter Avanti Nagral, cultural producer, curator, director, engendered, human rights champion Maina Mukherjee, and they will be and obviously we have head of office for Timor-Leste UN Women, Nisha Satyam, and they will be in conversation with theatre director Kwasar Thakur Padamsi. For more about this very distinguished panel, please refer to their bios that have been posted in the chat section. They should have been emailed to you earlier. Our panel of experts will discuss the emerging role and the growing leadership potential and the power of women in the arts in India and beyond. They will even talk about their own notable experiences as game changers in their respective fields and how they broke the glass ceiling, innovated, excelled, and triumphed as professionals. Please note the session will last 75 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A, where Kwasar will be taking questions submitted by the audiences. So do keep them posted. Keep posting them throughout the session. Don't wait till the end. On that note, thank you once again for tuning in. Over to you, Kwasar, to level set and look forward to a fascinating session. Thank you very much.
Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for being with us today. It's quite an interesting kind of topic that we've decided to nitpick and put together. The arts are a very, very marginalized conversation point in our society, and it's kind of important that we have a panel of people from artists to policymakers across the line to chat and to see what the role of the arts has in empowerment, and particularly with regards to the International Girl Child Day. So I'm going to just throw this out first up to the panelists, essentially with the question saying, why are you here, and why are the arts important, essentially. So I'm going to start. Maina, I'm going to put you on the spot first up. Take it away.
That's so unfair. But good evening. I was looking forward to actually listening to what the other panelists had to say. But thanks, Kwasar, for putting me in the spot, like you said. It's wonderful to be here. I came to the arts. I mean, for me, my home and my world was dance for a very long period of time. I had left many worlds, including one on Wall Street as a management consultant, to found Naikas, which was New York's first feminist classical Indian Odissi dance theatre company. And that's quite a wordful. So dance was an immense educator for me. It taught me about my body, both personalizing as well as politicizing it. It taught me about keeping an open mind, about relearning, about complicating and reappropriating terms like feminine and feminist. And most of all, it taught me that the generation of new knowledge is and must be part of our relationship with our own art forms. And historically, actually, in our society, in South Asia particularly, the arts have always been spaces of great activism. They are powerful and they are transformative spaces. They have, we have oral traditions, folk theater that have kept indigenous historical perspectives alive and have helped fuel revolutions against colonization. We have Sufi and Bhakti folk music that have helped create secular identities and bridge years of religious divides and fractures. Classical dance forms have preserved alternative masculinities and feminities from pre-colonial eras, as opposed to sort of like the two-dimensional patriarchal formulations of gender, and so on and so forth. So, that's really why I'm here. Founded Naikas and found my way to the arts because it was a passion. And from there, I wanted over the years to for Naikas to then become a platform where other practitioners could come and share and be invigorated and have conversations about things that were important to me. Conversations about the politics that surround us, around gender, around activism, around marginalities, about the politics of representation. So all of those things were really important to me. And I wondered when I came from the world of classical Indian dance, what the conversations would be if we were to reach out to other artists and practitioners. And they came together at one festival called Engendered. It was meant to be a one-time festival. And over a span of 1 year became 4 festivals annually in New York City, and was really, arts gave me everything. They, despite the kind of stereotypes that abound around arts, they have been incredibly giving to me. Both in terms of intellect, in terms of learning about, how to nuance my own thoughts. So I've been very privileged to work with artists across, different parts of the world, really. And the scope of Engendered has also sort of grown over the years. So that's really why I'm here. I want to hear
before,
from the other people.
Before we get further into Engendered, because that's a whole other kind of, Christmas gift for everyone to open up and dive into. Avanti, if I can come to you and just, ask why were the arts important to you? Why are, because you've gone, to want of a better phrase, you're a new age artist in the sense that you are part of the, tech generation, which is also using, the online world and stuff like that. So yeah, why are the arts important, and why are they important to you personally?
Firstly, Mina, that was beautiful, and I cannot wait to hear more about Engendered, and super grateful to be here on the panel with all of you. Thank you for the question, Kwasa. So music has been similar to how in Mina's case, dance has been a part of her life for, as long as she can remember. Music has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. When people ask me when I got into music, I jokingly say in utero, because my dad plays the tabla. By profession, he's a tech entrepreneur, but when he moved to the US, he would teach tabla on the side to make extra income, and it was always something that I grew up around. वो कहते हैं that mahal was at home, so I had that environment. So when I lived in the US in my early childhood, I started singing devotional music, bhajans and the like, and then when I moved to India, I started training in Indian classical. I had several other experiences, did a lot of professional theater, so I had a lot of stage experience, and went to a Christian high school, so a lot of choir experience. And I think the common thread for me among all of those diverse musical styles was this connection to the soulful and emotional aspect of music, right? That it can move you in a way that often nothing else can. I also grew up with a lot of health difficulties myself. I was born with a heart condition. I nearly lost my eyesight when I was 15, and several other major events like that, during which music was really the thing that kept me going, and it was very personally healing to me. And in realizing how personally healing it was to me, I realized the power of it as a medium that could be healing to others, but not just within a medium itself, but almost as a vehicle of change. So for me, I started as someone who had always been really passionate about academic spaces, and particularly in the spaces of global health and social impact. I started figuring out ways to marry the two, and for the longest time thought that I wanted to be at that intersection, perhaps from more of a policy or other space. And then I took a year off between high school and college, and that's a year during which I was doing a theater show all across India, which was a little insane. I think Wasser saw that show. We almost got arrested, and a whole situation. And it taught me the power of how the arts can make a statement, and how, if you stand up for what you believe in, and if you're able to do that in a very authentic and meaningful way, how far that can go. So I think, a lot of my teenage experiences taught me how powerful art is, and how within itself it can be a huge change maker. And for me, it was really important to be a part of that. So I, even though I studied psychology and global health, apologies, the lights just went off. Even though I studied psychology and global health at Harvard, I was also doing a dual degree at the Berklee College of Music, focusing on music, because to me, I really wanted to marry the two. And flash forward to today, I know it's hard to see me, I apologize for that, but flash forward to today, I have been, a performing artist, musician for a while, but during this past year, I've recognized, as you mentioned, as a new age artist per se, the power of the internet that goes beyond even that, whereby, younger folks, they want to understand not just your art, but who you are as an artist, and everything that surrounds that. So, that for me means having and creating songs, stories, and conversations on the internet, mobilizing a young generation of folks where we can talk about things openly, like mental health, like sex and sexual health, typically taboo topics, through the medium of music, and through also music being that starting point. So I think there is, for me personally, art has been healing. It's been a vehicle, but I also see it as this really this factor that allows us to bring change, bring conversations into the forefront, and this medium of expression that everybody can connect with. For example, I've had a lot of kids we released a song about mental health earlier this year, which is not super on the nose, but it's meant to be connecting with one emotionally. It's called Suntolo. And so many people have been able to show that song and their video to their families in a way that they've not been able to have that conversation, because they can easily just play a video for them or have them listen to a song, and hopefully that subliminally starts to seep in and they can start that conversation. So to me, it's amazing, because art is beautiful within itself, and I think it's also an amazing starting point.
Thank you, Avanti. So just it's quite interesting what you said, which is to start with, very, very personal, and in kind of the impact that it has. Nishtha, you work in a complete, like at the other end of the spectrum almost, with UN Women, and with regards to policy and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I know you're incredibly passionate about the role that the arts has in society. So yeah, like why? What does it mean? What does it mean both at a personal level and at a policy level in the work you do?
I think the one-line answer to why I'm here is your generosity, because nobody thinks of bureaucrats and diplomats and international civil servants when you think of arts. I think we're the antithesis, perceived antithesis, really, to art. So I'm really glad that you have me here. The little difference is, I think, when you speak about working on issues like gender, which is really about mindset change. It's about questioning, the oldest institution in the world, which is patriarchy. I've hardly, in my experience, found that policies work, laws work, regulations work. What really works is reaching out to the hearts and minds of people. And we've all had an experience where we've been moved by a little piece of art, a little piece of music, something that we see, something that we hear. But as policymakers, we often don't think of it. It's not the most intentional, obvious tool for change, which has surprised me through the years. So I've made a personal decision as the head of UN Women for a country to use the arts a lot more, and I intentionally use the word use as as capitalist as it sounds. But really, because we've tried everything else, and I think we're at a stage in the world where we know what works and what doesn't, but we're not ready to use what works, and that surprises me to really know. And so I'm here so that I can be a part of a fraternity that thinks like that, and we can make that change together.
Right, fantastic. Thank you, Nishna. So in a weird way, the almost newbie of the group in terms of artistic output is Anandita, who's just come out with her fantastic novel Illuminated. And yeah, so Anandita, I know that you've also had a relationship with art, which is actually much longer than just the actual writing of the book.
So Kasar, firstly, I'm sorry to everyone. There's some noise in the backdrop, but I hope that will go away. So I've been a journalist for around 15 years, and I actually studied at Columbia to be, there was a specialized course on, I studied to be an art journalist. So from the very start of my career, I've been kind of covering the arts. And I think most journalists, especially most features writers, if you ask them, they've always wanted to write. So I think I always wanted to write a novel, but I come from a family of professionals. Everybody, sings, plays an instrument, but everybody has, an office job. I didn't kind of have the privilege at 21 to say, okay, I've graduated, I'm going to write a novel, I'm going to hang around for 5 years and work on this book. So with my interest in writing, I found the closest career that I could have that could, which was journalism, that could still have me write, which was what I really wanted to do. But I wrote my first book, while having a job over 5 years, and it was out this July. Since this is a conversation about the arts specifically, I think I will leave the journalism part of it aside. I think it's very, it's a different kind of empowerment to actually express yourself through the arts, whether it's through dance, like Maina said, or music, as Avanti said, or theater, or cinema, or writing. Because often I feel that, women find it harder to give themselves the permission to write stories. I think there's a certain sense of confidence, there's a certain self-belief that you need to say that I'm a writer and that what I have to say is important. And I think, so it took me a while, even though I think I was a relatively successful journalist, it took me a while to think that I had this novel that I wanted to write that would be of interest to people. So I think the idea of writing nonfiction and writing fiction kind of really, occupies very different parts of yourself. And I found writing fiction to be very empowering. There were, especially in the kind of journalistic atmosphere that we are seeing around us today, I think fiction allowed me to say more truths than I could as an editor or a reporter. And I really do feel that fiction is a space where you can inhabit characters without judgment, where you can explore ideas and explore nuance, go beyond this concept of cancel culture and really get to the psychology of character. So I found that incredibly freeing and incredibly interesting to be able to do that, which I couldn't do in my 15 years as a journalist. So writing fiction, was very special and very empowering to me in that way, and that's what I hope to do going ahead.
So, sorry, just to pick up on that, I mean, you talked about the concept of permission or the validation to speak. So, I just want to ask you, is that because so much of the stories that we read when we were young were told from the male perspective or by men? Is that what was prescribed in schools, what we picked off the bookshelf?
Precisely, Kasar. Yes, I mean, I hope it was different for others, but in my teens, the kind of books that I was reading or exposed to, or the books in my syllabus that was considered literature, were all by men. So I think we consumed the minutiae of the lives of middle-aged men as literature. When women were writing about concerns that were domestic or concerns that were, as intimate to them, that was chick lit, that wasn't considered, that was something you read as a guilty pleasure or for fun. But what was considered serious was, whether it was Julian Barnes or Rushdie or Coetzee. This was what was, or even Anton Chekhov, this was literature. So I think, I do think that the publishing landscape is changing, not just in India, but globally. There's a conscious effort to publish more women of all ages. And I think we can also be incredibly ageist as a society, which is not okay as well. So I think I love when I hear that a woman's published her first book at 61. Why do you have to always be this kind of young wonder? Why is there this pressure to be this, under 30 success? Because I think often women have other, caregiving roles or other duties that might prevent them from kind of working on something, right, for 5 or 6 years, the privilege that men or their partners might have. So women often start late. But I do find that publishers are now consciously publishing more female voices. And the minute the gender identity of the author changes, I think that the stories that they write about changes as well, because women will naturally write about things that concern them. One of the things that we had spoken about earlier was about, why there was this sudden influx of mother-daughter stories. Even Avni Doshi's book, which was, an Indian origin writer, was shortlisted for the Booker as mother-daughter. I think the answer is simply that there are more women writing books, and women will write about other women. That's natural. The closest relationship that a woman has in most cases to another woman is to her mother. And I think that's just the simple explanation. So I do feel that, more women are writing, and that's changing what we are consuming as literature. And I find that wonderful.
So just picking up off what you said with regards to the permission aspect and the fact that distribution is dependent on someone else in a way. Avanti, you've gone a completely separate route where you've kind of blown your own distribution, channel. So a couple of questions. One is, within the music industry or within the music you create, were there certain pigeonholes that you were faced with, and did you then have to ascribe to them, or did you have to break those? And kind of change anything? And also, what were there obstacles in trying to get your work out there, or was it simply like, no, I'm just gonna conquer this and put it out for what I want?
Firstly, the book sounds super exciting, Anandita, and I'm super excited to read it. To your question, Professor, unfortunately, an industry like the music industry is extremely gatekept, particularly in India. And part of that is because until fairly recently, the music industry has not wholly existed independently without the film industry, right? We've created music for film for so many years that it's been an integral part of that, which is incredible. But there have been, artists who have created independently for years, and it's only been in the last, I would say, decade or so that it's been organized as an independent industry. The same way in which you have, doesn't necessarily have to be pop in the way you think of pop, but a separate pop music industry in so many other parts of the world. India is only just getting there. And part of, I think, the tricky portion is the limited access to the gatekeepers, right? Now, on one hand, a lot of the gatekeepers are male, which isn't necessarily an issue, but it does cause the portrayal of women to be often put a certain way. I've worked with so many people all across India and across different spaces, different agencies, and they've all been wonderful. But my team today is a team of 3 women, and that's very intentional, because I found that, working with a lot of men who've been in this industry for many years, they didn't necessarily understand. And with music, unlike acting, you are representing an extension of yourself, right? You're not just simply playing a role. So I needed somebody who understood what that extension of myself was, and that extension of that experience was, the lived experience. So that's very interesting. The other thing that's a little bit bizarre, but I can understand, is in spaces like music, and early on when I did theater, there were also some folks who were interested in doing casting for ads and in film and TV, is that there was always this dichotomy that if you are in the arts, you cannot be traditionally smart, whatever that means. So people would find out, for example, that I was going to Harvard, or they would find out whatever they would find out, and they would deny me opportunities because they would say things like, oh, you're too intelligent for this, we're looking for somebody who's meant to be a little bit more artistic. Or they would say, your chest needs to be a little bit bigger for you to be able to sell this. And comments like that are deep rooted in patriarchy and the way in which we objectify women, right, and see them as objects rather than as humans with their own identity. And so I think today, um, I distribute all my music independently. There are independent distributors, and I've also been able to amass a sizable, online audience and offline as well. And I'm grateful that the internet has really democratized that space and allows us to go direct to consumer. Whereas 10, 15, 20 years ago, that just wasn't the case, and you had to go through the gatekeepers. So I think it's changing, and it's not just that we need more women in the space, because we truly do. You might see female artists and musicians, but you don't see too many producers or engineers or people kind of in other roles that are supporting and often even more important for that infrastructure. But it's more that we need allies across the gender spectrum who are able to support all expressions, right, and not see folks as in a box or in a stereotype, or really as objects, if you will.
Right. Actually, it's interesting because Maina, you actually took a classical form and suddenly tried to change the material, as it were, and move away from the male lens that form was obsessed with, and kind of change that. I think you did something with the Dasavtar, switching it to make it, Kali's Dasavtar. So what was, I mean, I'm just trying to think of when you were starting out and when you were trying to work, especially within a classical form. Modern pop music has a lot of role models that have been, women and very strong women, particularly Madonna onwards and all of that. So what is, what was that like at that point when you guys were starting out, when you were putting it together? What was the impulse for that? And it's a horrible term, just breaking the glass ceiling, but what really was the mold or the pigeonhole that you were trying to shatter out of?
That's a great question, Gozar, and a really complicated one to answer, but I'm going to try to answer it anyway. I think what's always wonderful about these conversations is that, even when you're listening to other panelists, you always pick up on resonances in everyone's life. Like while I'm listening to Anandita, while I'm listening to Avanti, there's so much in their journeys that is so similar, right? And I want to say that when we are talking about patriarchy in cultures like ours, it isn't really just in the classical world. It is actually exactly whether I'm inhabiting like a boardroom and I left Wall Street when I was a VP for a convertibles arbitrage hedge fund. From the boardroom of Wall Street to, I would say, I'm a curator now in the art world. And I've been part of the classical dance theater world. I've been part of we've done a lot of concerts with MTV. Across the board, like Avanti said, there are practitioners, but patriarchy steeps in everywhere. Like the production of work, what is told, like, as you stay more and more in the arts, at one point, Naika's we wanted to contextualize the work that Nika was doing by bringing together other art practitioners, theorists, activists, who in turn would create this platform of mutual support and opportunities and be publicly recognized for this very particular reason. So going back to your question about, what we did specifically with classical dance, we didn't want to change the form. We wanted to expand on it, and we worked with a lot of contemporary dance theater. So that's the form that we worked on. And, that was a whole other drive. But in terms of the content, even for the classical world, the stories that we always tell, and they are beautiful stories, but the stories are always from a male gaze, right? You're always telling stories of Krishna, or you're telling stories of Vishnu, or so we thought that it would be interesting to have a completely classical idiom for a dance. And we worked with a university professor in researching for over a year one of the most well-known dance pieces in a Odissi repertoire. And that is the Dasa Avatar, which is the 10 forms and incarnations of Vishnu. And almost every classical dance form in India will have that piece in some version or the other. So we thought it would be interesting to do an exact opposite research on whether there were anarchical goddesses. And so we did a piece called the Dasa Mahavidya that had actually been researched before, but we sort of fleshed it out a little bit more, and it was the 10 forms of Kali. And Kali was interesting because mythology is interesting, the resonances again in terms of, metaphors that they stand for. So these were goddesses that were not subservient. These were goddesses that did not have a male counterpart. So, for example, Lakshmi had, there's a Kali that is a version of Lakshmi, but Lakshmi is married, and there's a version of Kali that is a widow. So just kind of looking really, at roles that women are seen and are marginalized on within society, and kind of reverse that through using very traditional tools. So that was one experiment, and for many years we did that. And the answer to your question, again, like, it's not simple. Like, from the time of having to construct the piece, we wanted very much that the grammar stayed very classical, that we could not be faulted in, because the piece, we wanted to go to the most Brahmanical traditional spaces for dance and see the kind of resonance that this work would have. And if we could, and that is exactly what we did. And we were, we went to something called the International Odissi Dance Festival, which was, which had every single well-known Odissi guru, who are all, by the way, men, for very many years. And I see Avanti smiling, because I'm sure that with the classical music world, that is also the same. I mean, you have plenty of dance and music teachers in the classical world, but they are never given the status of a guru. So everything from the practice to the way it is, to production, like the production of the work, the musicians, they decide, from rhythm patterns to wanting to break that. Every little step of production has a layer of patriarchy kind of over the years in place to kind of, claim that space. So, that's also the reason why from dance, my journey to curation happened. I started, curating because I thought it was important to enter the space of cultural production, because obviously artists will only create when newer narratives and stronger stories and tell their own stories when they have the space to take those risks. Otherwise, they're always subscribing to what is around them, what the market dictates. And we wanted to, be able to do that. So a lot of what Nishtha is saying in terms of policies and creating, but also the ecosystem around it needs to be produced. The production tools have to be in the hands of women as well. So, I heard Avanti saying that it's okay for men to be producers, and of course it is okay, but women need to be producers as well. We need, cultural capital is important to be instrumented by feminist voices, feminine voices as much. I don't know if that answers the question, but like I said, that's such a big...
No, that really helps. But Maina, just a question, particularly with regards to what you were doing and what your practice is, because it seemed that from that point on, going into engendered and stuff is quite a different, kind of route. But was there a switch moment? Was there a moment of, actually, I don't want to do this, I want to do that in the arts, and the arts kind of opens that up and gives me the opportunity to do that, similar to what Nishtha was saying earlier? Was there a moment where you suddenly went, okay, this is what I want to do, and this is what I want to do within my art?
Always. The driving force is the interest of what you want. Like Anandita said earlier, there are many things. Everything interests me. Like politics interests me, theory interests me, legal frameworks interest me, and all of them are very valuable. But the thing about the arts is that it helps you feel, and you never forget how you feel. So you can enter a classroom and hear what a professor is saying, and you will remember a lot of it. But you might forget it. You might forget legal research, but you will never forget how an artist made you feel in a particular moment. And that power, like I said, is so transformative that if you can, so I had very strong activist roots. I mean, for me, art has to relate to its contemporary moment. And even from, I mean, this is a little bit more dense, but I've had so many conversations in my formative years with artists who, after long practice years, have questioned the role of art in their own personal growth, and what is the purpose of art. And and that conversation, when it intersects with the idea that art is transformative and has a larger purpose, I think that's when there's a catalyst kind of chemical reaction that happens, and that is very exciting. And I just rode the train on that, and went and just built on that over the years. So we had a film festival, we had a literature festival, we had the performing arts, we had a MTV concert, and we had visual arts, which each of it opened up a new world. And it was both very different, but it was also very, very similar. So
just on that point of having, let's say, producers who are women and whatever, Nishta, I want to bring you into this, because you work actually in an Uber producer capacity, because you're working with policy. It's even larger than that. And is there within all the policy organizations that you work with, even before the UN and within the civil service, is there a dragging of feet when it comes to enabling women to make art, both in content or in the in the structures that are required? Was that ever a concern?
Well, it's a complicated question, because the answer to that is, obviously, is an obvious yes. But one has to understand that art, like art itself, art gives you, it's almost the philosophy of most art, and all art, is also this reconciliation that it offers between freedom and form, between sensuality and rationality. So it does offer a very a way of ensuring a more liberal, democratic, and if I may say, a more humanizing approach towards bringing the same change that the government intends to. So in essence, we're not working towards different goals. It's not that every time it's come to me as a bureaucrat or as a diplomat, I think, essentially the person in front of me proposing to do this through art is convincing me of doing something which is fundamentally different from my mandate. No. But the truth is that when you still talk about art, we're still at like you said, you opened the conversation by saying it is one of the most marginalized, it is a frilled conversation to have. And so it is in every part of the world, and so it is in every aspect of decision making and policy making. Today, when you talk about policy makers, I've met a lot of policy makers who are personally very influenced by art, who personally are very invested in it. But there's something that stops us from bringing it to the table as the tool for change. Whenever we make our union budgets, how many times do we say we want to work on sanitation and hygiene, and here's a 500 crore budget to do it through art? But how many times have we heard that? And how many times have we questioned the union budget for not having invested in art as a tool? I'm not even saying as a form, but as a tool for social change. And the truth is that everybody, and one of the typical examples is sanitation and hygiene. When you, and this is a real example from a project on the ground much before Swachh Bharat started, where we went to a few households at the grassroots, and we said, it's for your hygiene. We must stop the practice of open defecation, and we made toilets, and we constructed toilets. And 2 years later, when one of our donors wanted to come and visit the ground, we said, let's go back and see how it's going. And we went back, and all the toilets we had built were converted, were tiled had been tiled from the inside and converted into puja rooms because there was an extra space. They said, what do we do with this? They had taken the complete toilet, tiled it from the inside, and converted it into a space that they didn't have within their own households. And here we were thinking, oh my God, like, how did we miss this? How did we miss that we're not going to make change by constructing infrastructure? But have we learned from that process? Have we learned that change doesn't happen through infrastructure? Change doesn't happen through policies. It doesn't happen through regulation. It happens purely, change is personal. And that's what we know. Change is personal. Change is mostly political. Art is political. And we have to bring those two learnings together to say, how do we converge the political with the political? How do we converge the personal with the political? And how do we make the personal political? And that's in that moment of transition is where change happens, and that's where art speaks to people about things that we can preach about, but we can't implement. But at the same time, having said that, and having all that knowledge, when I sit on the table as a bureaucrat, when I'm making my budget, what stops me from committing a certain percentage of my budget to art to make that change? Because it's still a free conversation. It's still seen as a soft idea. Today, when 10 bureaucrats are sitting in the room, the one that's proposing to do this through art is seen in a way that, is not the usual bureaucratic conversation to have. And that's what we must normalize, because we already have the knowledge. Like I say, the world knows what works. Or perhaps, let me put it the other way around, the world knows what doesn't work. There is something that hasn't worked for centuries, and we know that. But we must also show the courage to get up and say, listen, it hasn't worked. Whatever we're doing hasn't worked. So let's try and speak to mediums. And we know of revolutions that have been started by art, because it's not that it represents yourself, it's also political representation, but it's also representation of lives that people have lived, and lives that people will live. So today, if I have to know, it's also very futuristic, and we always think of art as something that depicts the past. Art as something that depicts what has happened, what has gone by. But art is also very futuristic. It allows you to imagine a future that doesn't exist, and imagine a future you want, which is actually the fundamental point of all policies, is imagining the future we want and creating it. But of course, it's not very cool to be seen as a bureaucrat to be talking about art and frill tools. And that's why today, even today, whatever we say, gender is a frill conversation sometimes. It's the most it's the most talked about. If you see, it's the most least invested agenda of the world. Right. And today we've started asking about what percentage of the budget is dedicated to gender. The day we ask what percentage of the budget is dedicated to art, and then come to the conversation on intersection, is the day we'll make that change, perhaps.
So there's a theater director called Vijay Kenkre who once told me something very simple. He said the role of experimental theater is to push the boundaries of commercial theater, because commercial theater will never push boundaries. This was the idea, because that, and is that in a sense also the role of art when we compare it to commercial? So for example, like when we're talking about Avanti's music or Anandita's book or even Mina's festivals, we're not really talking about commercial festivals, and we're not looking at commercial considerations in that way. So Nishtha, is that something that does happen and needs to happen, which is how does art cater to the non-mainstream conversation, and should it?
Well, again, my perspective of what is mainstream and your perspective of what is mainstream and what the world thinks, I think for us, art is mainstream. For someone else outside this conversation, art may not be mainstream, right? So I think the doing away of the term, what we think, what we call mainstream is for me, is the first step. But to answer your question, does art pushes boundaries? Of course it pushes boundaries. Like I said, art is deeply political. And it comes from a space of self-expression. It comes from a space of reflecting society. And we've known people from Frida Kahlo to those to Afghani graffiti artists who've painted roads and stores and highways that have conveyed, angst and pain that people have had to go through. We know that, forms of art, we all talk about Picasso, but we fail to realize sometimes that the essence of that art was deeply political in its and so the moment the moment we say art, it does push boundaries. It pushes your imagination, it pushes you to personalize, it pushes you to see something and experience something that you may not resonate with at times, or you may not see yourself with, or you may see yourself with it. So, of course, art pushes boundaries. How do we reconcile this from a frill conversation to the mainstream conversation? I think that dialogue is yet to happen, right? Like I said, when we look at the union budget, do we think art? We don't, because we don't even think that the government is supposed to invest in it. We don't hold our representatives accountable to invest in art. And I think that's where we need to bridge that dialogue from this being a living room conversation to a boardroom conversation. I think that graduation is yet to happen, and there are many ways through which it can happen. It has taken us so far and so long for gender to start trickling into mainstream conversations. It has taken us revolutions, it's taken us millions of women coming together. It has taken us solidarity, Kausar, and that's the word I'm going to use again. Today when we were speaking on the phone as a prep for this conversation, we were talking about Kamala Vasil. Today, most of her introductions on Facebook say a South Asian feminist. And it's so beautiful to hear that. Today, we've lost that solidarity, that coming together of people who believe in something and take it beyond the thresholds of boundaries, of national boundaries, of safety, security. And I think that, to me, is how we are going to push this conversation from a webinar to actually a policy dialogue. Which is good, which has to be backed by evidence of how it's worked. And like I said, I'm using the word again and again and the phrase again and again, because that's the one thing that changes policies. Is when you put evidence on the table and say, listen, we did this, it worked better than this. And that's how we convince governments to invest. And I think if we can steer dialogue, and if we can, it's going to take all of us, and it's going to take all of us to speak together at the same time about the same thing. And hopefully we will be there.
Ananda, coming to you just quickly, and picking up from what Nishta said a little bit, which is to push that conversation forward. When you were creating work, either as a journalist, or as an editor, when you were trying to source stories on the gender page or whatever, or even in your book, was there a feeling of responsibility to this larger sense of solidarity that we are now seeing the fruits of? Or was it just an artistic impulse of, this is what I want to say, and I'm not really worried about, what was happening?
Right. So my book, The Illuminated, is actually specifically about women coming together. It's about, there is a mother and daughter at the heart of it, but there are women who belong to different kind of, class identities and, have different levels of privilege. And it is about women kind of finding their light or finding their identity, and hence kind of the title, The Illuminated. So I read Simone de Beauvoir again, in a lot of detail. I read The Second Sex, something that we all read in college, but, there have been so many other feminist texts since that are more nuanced, that are kind of speaking more to newer concerns, that that are addressing more of going beyond this kind of gender binary. But I still felt that Simone de Beauvoir that her text was continued to be relevant, and there were things that she said that I really responded to in the book. So I feel your question, for my book in specific, since it's about women and women's identities, I did feel a sense of responsibility. I do feel that it's a very angry book. I think that there were kind of years of, frustration or anger at different injustices that I kind of represented through fiction. Perhaps to truly write fiction, to truly explore fiction, you have to move beyond that kind of responding to, personal anger. You have to kind of move beyond into a more exploratory zone. But I think first books do tend to be everything that the author wants to say, they tend to be a little more biographical. So I feel that's all out there now. But yes, Kausar, to answer the question, I think at the very heart of this book, which is my first book, is about, the whole metaphor of sun and moon. It's about, we think that, the solar system or everything revolves around the sun. So all the names of the men in the book. They are various names of the sun, but what happens when the sun is gone? The man, the kind of patriarch of the book, dies on page 1. So how do the women kind of find their own identity? Because women, I feel, are always kind of defining themselves in relationship to a central male figure, whether it's the father or the husband or, you know, whatever else, or the prime minister of the country. So how do you define yourself without that figure? So my book was very much about that. And I think that is what that's what I wanted to do when I started off, and that's what moved me. Yeah, I don't know if that really answered your question.
No, that makes sense. Avanti, you kind of put out quite a lot of stuff in terms of music, in terms of videos, things like that. You're creating, you know, almost rapidly at a rate. So again, my question is: are you aware of yourself as a young woman creator, or are you just saying I'm creating? Because also you're talking about mental health, you're talking about all sorts of various things. But I guess the question is, do we see ourselves as symbols in some way? I don't know. I'm just, you know, as representative, not symbol. I think symbol is the wrong word. As a representative of what is happening, like what is contemporary as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. Prior to last year, I was, you know, primarily a performing artist, right? And when you're doing that with music, even though it is your own experience or you're drawing from that, you can still have some disassociation from it. But when you get into, as you said, this creator world, where my output is on some platforms every day and on others that are more longer form, you know, a couple times a week. So it's a lot of you putting different versions of yourself or what you care about out there. And I think there's a very fine line between the human and the human brand sometimes, or the person and the persona, you know. What's been interesting for me particularly, and, you know, I really resonated with what you said, Nishtha, particularly as somebody, because I've always cared about these spaces, and I've always believed that intersection is possible. So seeing somebody on your side of the spectrum say that just really warms my heart, you know, because I think it's so important. And to that end, a lot of my audience, if you will, and that's the thing, right? You have to think of it as in almost these data-based demographic terms, right? So my demographics of my audience are primarily basically teenagers, younger folks. You know, I would say the general age range is between 13 to 25, and primarily South Asia based. And what's been interesting is you do see yourself in some sense as some sort of a representative, right? Partially because of your gender, but partially also because of what you talk about. And there's so few people doing that through various media in the same way. So you see on the daily people sending you messages which are extremely kind, but talking about how something has impacted the way their relationship with themselves or with their families, or the way they think about something, or and those are really beautiful and heavy things, right? And I think, Kwasar, you and I were talking about this earlier when you and I were having a conversation. In our culture, right, we have this idea that somebody, even if we don't know them well, we associate them with family or familial terms. So for a lot of my audience, I am their di or their didi, right? So I would say 70% of them call me Avanti di on a daily basis, and they treat me as such too. So they will tell me things as if they are speaking to an older sister, or come almost, you know, for guidance in some sense. And there are ways. We have something which some of you may be familiar with or may not at all be familiar with. We have something called a Discord server, which is essentially like a massive group chat where you can directly connect with your audience, and learning from them every day, to me, is huge. And also bizarre seeing the way in which they come together, right? Because they're all coming there because they all like you or like what you represent. And then you're able to build community off of that point. But it is a really bizarre reckoning. And I do find myself sometimes almost playing into the role that they see me occupy. So it's hard to know what is coming from where sometimes. But I think to be true and honest to yourself, you have to see what feels like an extension of yourself, right? So I am an older sister in real life. And for me, that it just feels like an extension of my identity. And the conversations I have, I, for example, have involved my grandmother in some of the conversations I have on the internet. We've done a few conversations around sex and, gender equity and the like. And I think for a lot of folks, that even though it feels personal, it feels representative to them, like you were saying, right? Because it's two generations talking to one another. My aji, or my grandmother, is very traditional presenting Maharashtrian woman. And so almost no parent can say no to an aji, And so people are able to then show these videos and these pieces to their families as conversation starters. And so it almost becomes like she's been co-opted as the aji, right? And for some people, I've been co-opted as the didi, which is fascinating, but a interesting way of how we kind of need to put our own structures onto what we consume.
Avanti, you were saying something about your demographic, and is it what is the ratio roughly male to female of people who follow? I mean, now that we have metrics and things like that, we can actually track this kind of stuff. Do you have an idea as to, is there a shift? Are young boys, young male teenagers, logging in and listening to these conversations?
Yeah, I thought for the longest time that the appeal would likely be to teenage girls, right? Because of relevant shared experience. But it's pretty much 50-50. And I've been so amazed and surprised as to what teenage boys, or just, this new generation of men or boys are like, because they are growing up as feminists. They are growing up caring about periods and menstrual hygiene and sex and sexual health and mental health and issues that typically older generations I've seen have dichotomized, right? Because to them that's a woman's issue, but they see it as a human issue. And in fact, sometimes they engage even more with those conversations in an effort to learn, which I find really fascinating and really warms my heart. I have a younger brother, so I'm very intentional about making sure that that's the environment at home. But to me, seeing that with other strangers on the internet who've now co-opted that is really beautiful. And the way in which they come to it is also really interesting. I've done podcasts with several young individuals, and they're not coming to it from a superficial lens. They're coming to it also not just because they have a mother or a sister or a girlfriend. They're coming to it because they truly care, and that I think is important. And that mindset shift, I think, needs to start young, needs to start at homes where we talk about all of these aspects. So something as simple as, I never got the sex talk in school. My younger brother did. And I remember when he did, they separated the boys and the girls, and the boys were talked to about all the, reproductive functions and basically sex and condoms. And the girls were talked to about periods. And I found that really bizarre, why there was this inequity in information when everybody should know what are all aspects of, the reproductive and human experience. So I think that's changing, and I think that interest is changing, and it just warms my heart when I see it.
Kasar, I just want to add something,
Please
to
do.
what Avanti said earlier, to your question when you said whether women artists or women creators should be role models. I feel, of course, you lead by example, and that's important, but there's also the danger of kind of being slotted into a certain space. I'm always a little bit wary about prizes for women writers or prizes for that's needed, you feel, to kind of equalize something. It's an ongoing conversation, but it kind of always makes me a bit nervous, because I feel those are always smaller prizes. So does it mean that then women, or say queer artists, or are they not going to be eligible for that other big coveted prize? Why do this? There needs to be that diversity and representation needs to happen at a much more basic level, not at the superficial level. And just like, say, Dalit writers should be free to write about anything. They should not be pushed by publishers to just write about their caste identity. Similarly, I feel women should be free to write about, humor. They should write thrillers. They should write and engage in every space they like. Women shouldn't be, you shouldn't be reduced to your kind of gender identity to kind of, only be speaking to teenage girls or write books that appeal to women. So I find that there's a fine line there, and there's a danger in that, in the way that we curate. I'm sure Maina might have, something to add there, or in the way awards are structured. Why should there be, best award for blah, 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 and then best female artist, Why does that happen? So I feel there's that identity, that identification is important, but it should not, be to the extent that it's slotting or kind of, boxing a female artist into a space.
Right. Nisha, you wanted to add something on this?
I just wanted to come in on that as a policymaker, because it's I think there's a very, and I'm purely talking from a policymaker's perspective, because that's all that I qualify for right now. I think when we work on policy, we feel when we are mandated to create these spaces for women, these platforms for representation. Sometimes I think there's a very thin line being on not being reduced to your gender identity, but also not being discriminated because of your gender identity. So I think, the way forward will be to also, like Ananda said, is to continue to lobby for those mainstream spaces where we create these alternate spaces and create them enough that these alternate spaces are no longer alternate. They also become mainstream spaces. And I come from the same view where sometimes I remember when I work on creating something that's a women's only space. Let me put it like that. Something in me also feels uncomfortable sometimes, thinking, should we have that reservation of space for women? And I've questioned myself on that a couple of times. But the truth is, men have an automatic reservation of space. So by creating these alternate spaces sometimes, but I understand the tension that Ananda's talking about, and we have the same tension too while we create these spaces, while we sponsor or fund a Women's Writers Fest or a women's only panel. But I think these realities will coexist until we navigate through the mainstream spaces, or we basically create enough space that becomes difficult to ignore any longer. But I kind of resonate with the tension that she's putting forward on the table, because we have it too.
So Maina, sorry, just to bring you in here, because you've actually created space for a particular kind of conversation with the what I'm going to call the engendered bouquet of things with visual art and film and performances and music. So two questions. One major question is: do you find that more, for example, more men are creating work on these issues? Just to take what Nishta was saying about pigeonholes and separate sides, but are we looking at more people talking across? Are we in the ideal world, as Avanti said, moving to a more 50-50 where the newer generation of creators are also aware of the whole picture, which I must say, even in my generation, the training that we were handled was always only the half picture. What we assumed was neutral was actually the male gaze, and now are we looking at that, and are people kind of breaking through that a little bit?
I don't know how to answer that question really, because I don't know. I can't speak for how I think artists create work. I think as a curator, my interest in curation is largely personal, and it's driven by my interest not just in art but also the artists themselves. So artists who understand, rewrite, and knowingly or unknowingly change history, which think about themselves as narratives in the larger world of art. So that's what I'm attracted to. So spaces that I curate will have voices. They are densely privileged spaces where the discovery of artists or new works are really able to communicate what resonates with me, what I have discovered about myself. So it's a very personal curation in a certain kind of way. And again, it looks for resonances. It looks for stories that mean something to me. And I even while I'm listening to Anandita, of course we should. I have the same problem as a curator who is interested in political work. We always say that Engendered is both a political as well as an aesthetic festival. That's the first way that we identify ourselves and distinguish ourselves from other festivals. But I find it remarkable that people expect that they would see a certain kind of art when they come. And I think the success of a lot of the work that we have done over the years has been the surprise of seeing something completely different from what they go in expecting to see in a regular organization that says that the mandate is gender and sexuality. Or, and I think that that's surprise, because everything is what isn't about gender and sexuality and what isn't political. Even when work is non-political, it says something about why it is being produced in with a non-political gaze, or why people are looking at it and why are they consuming more of it. So even that is a political statement, right? So it's really about what you want to see. And my last exhibition was India's first solo AI show, for example, artificial art, intelligence and art. And we're talking about democratizing, we're talking about how AI has been used over the years to a particular kind of purpose, to stereotype, to discriminate, and the idea, and also for these tools of mass destruction, weaponizing, that's typically what AI has been used for. So to use AI for art itself is breaking away from convention. To create it then to, highlight and bring, instead of, ever since September 11th, when the Twin Towers went down, we sort of gave a nod to AI to kind of peer into our lives. And everything, starting from our choice of what shoes we wear, what books we read, what Netflix shows us, all of it is really AI driven. So when we talk about free human will, it's very curated for us right now by AI. So instead of getting sucked into technology, how do you engage with it, and how do you use it to extend human imagination? And then also reverse what it has typically been used for. So how do you create empathy for the power structures that exist? So there's a work that we've helped create that talks about gender as a spectrum, and it was especially commissioned for one of the most well-known art fairs in Italy. And there's another work that talks about the caste discrimination, or highlights it. It talks about appropriation, where any person who stands in front of an AI machine has their face, transformed into a Kathakali dancer and a Thayyam dancer. And the Kathakali dancer Kathakali is typically very Brahmanized, and Thayyam is much more, folks who are from tribal backgrounds and from socially caste systems that are deprived. And so this is an opportunity for a person to kind of just step into the shoes of both a high caste and a low caste, and it kind of draws attention to this caste barrier that exists. So AI could be used to generate more empathy rather than to create a stereotyping or kind of surveillance that it is typically used for. So for me, that is political. It's work that is amazing. It's at the edge of technology. And at the same time, it's being produced by a curator who very much talks about gender and sexuality through all of her curations. So I feel that there are many, we are constantly expanding the notion of what gender, a gender-driven lens is as well. We're challenging that all the time. We are trying to find ways to intersect larger conversations with conversations about marginalizations, intersections. Our next curation is at talking about how South Asian art has been stereotyped in a certain kind of way. And it's in a very international space with 3 Italian museums. And there's a hierarchy there as well.
So, sorry, just to interrupt you there, because we're also getting a bunch of questions and we need to kind of get to those. But one of the questions actually is about, the question is, how can this kind of a conversation be extended towards the gay community? But I think if we were to, let's say, enlarge that to other marginalized conversations. So my question to the entire room here actually is, there seems to be a lot of things that we that we have pushed to the side over the years as a society. Women being one, LGBTQI rights is another. I think Anandita talked about Dalit writers being pigeonholed as another Dalit issue. All of this. So my question is, how does what, let's say, the trend that is happening right now, where suddenly women are slowly coming into stronger positions, and that conversation is happening. Can we use that as a template to extend that to other marginalized societies? Is there scope for that? Maina, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Nishtha, because you're working on engendered. So I'm just trying to understand within the engendered space, what is that kind of thing?
Well, a couple of years back, when I first came into the country, I mean, I was in New York for about over 20 years. And when I first came into the country, I unwittingly created this space of incubation, which was supposed to look at alternate modes of artistic productions, especially focused on gender and sexuality. And the first exhibition that we did was something called Can You See Me? And it talked about stereotyping. And basically, we put a call out for queer artists. And I think 2 artists responded, and one of them, Balbir Krishan, his work had just been brought down at the Lalit Kala Academy because it was an openly queer. One of the first artists was an openly queer artist, and that when I came to India in 2011, 2012, I mean, that was really what was happening. And cut to, I think, 2016, right before the judgment, the second Supreme Court judgment, reversed the decision that the High Court had given. We had 36 embassies pooled together for it was an exhibition called Maybe that looked at the individual as well as the community around queerness. And over 24 openly queer artists who identified as queer sort of submitted their works for it. So, I mean, clearly, very rapidly, the world has been changing, is changing. It is, I mean, there's opportunity everywhere. Every conversation, can lead to action in a certain kind of way. There are more opportunities. I think all of us have to see ourselves as catalysts after a certain point, and have to really seize those opportunities, whether we are artists, whether we are policymakers, whether we are, I think a lot of the concerns, a lot of the aspirations are similar, but to really be able to take what we see and hear and inform ourselves with, and to take it to a broader audience, perhaps, or to nuance the conversation further, or to help create, opportunities for someone who doesn't have production, resources for certain things. I think these are ways in which we can grow and grow the tribe, like they say.
Nishtha, on a policy level, are there lessons? Are there synergies? I mean, given the fact that you're right now working with UN Women, which has a kind of mandate, is there learnings across for other marginalized societies, either at the global level or even within the Indian context?
Of course, I think there are very sound and strong lessons, and very obvious lessons. I think women have waited for a very long time. Women in art is a very old conversation. It's probably one of the oldest conversations. It's just that it's an invisible conversation. We've managed to invisibilize them in art, in history, in culture, forever. And I think it has taken us thus far and so long to really bring them on the table. And like we always say, if you're not on the table, you're on the menu. So I think the short lesson is to not take as much time as we took for women, and of course to end the conversation about binaries, which is men and women, which I think is such a long lost conversation in the world in 2021, is to bring more, is to bring the spectrum on the table, and also use art, but to also think that all spaces are fundamentally patriarchal, and so is art. So that hierarchy that even exists within the arts world has to be broken, has to be challenged, has to be questioned. And it has to, and when people like us have a strong role to play because it has taken so much for us to be on the table. So we must also ensure a longer table for others, and it becomes both a matter of responsibility and accountability.
Or we do what Steve Biko recommended. He says, I don't want permission to sit at your table. I'm saying let's break the table and build one together. But coming in, there's a question actually that's come from Nandan Shastri for Avanti actually, which is what are your thoughts on the mindset of Indian youth vis-a-vis American youth? For example, you said girls talk about monthly cycles. For example, in the USA, there is a museum of menstruation and women's health. So is there, particularly within, I'm assuming, the urban conversation in India and in America, or rather the tech generation in India and America, is there a large gap in those kind of conversations that you are seeing in or that you are engaging with?
I think, the beauty of tech has really, it's been an equalizer, right, in terms of people's access to information. So I don't think there is a huge difference. I think there's a few different factors. So one, in general, because of the culture and nature of our high school systems and just school systems in general, what we find, at least what I find, is what a, let's say, typically American or Western teenager might experience in their early teenagers, Indian youth is experiencing in their late teenage years. So there's a little bit of a few year delay gap in terms of just general experience. But in terms of engagement with issues, you'd be surprised. It's not just an urban conversation. A lot of folks who are having these conversations are from various parts of India, various parts of the country. I would say some of my most engaged audience is actually in tier 2, tier 3 cities. And part of that is, I think, because they are not getting that information from their households and their schools, so they are turning to the internet for that conversation, right? And so for them, that is the place in which they obtain a lot of that information. And for them, they want that upward mobility in terms of mindset of this being okay in their spaces. I get messages. I'm so sorry. There's something bizarre with this light. But I get messages on the daily asking about how people feel stuck where they feel like they have this mindset of change and they want to bring that, but they grew up in a society where, say, their older generations don't understand that as well, right? So kind of how do they bridge that gap? But in terms of, it's amazing that these museums and the like exist, but I find that it's hard, and I've lived exactly half my life between India and the US, so I can say this with experience, that what we think of the US is often a portrayal of, like you rightly said, urban and often coastal cities, right? It's not what the US looks like as a whole or what the West looks like as a whole. There's a lot of parts of this space that are quote unquote backwards still, right? And often I find even more so than in India. So I don't think it's a dichotomy where one is necessarily more modern than the other or vice versa, but I think they're just growing, and the cultural nuances are different, right? In India, having intergenerational conversations is important because that's what's going to bring change. Whereas in the US, that's not as important because they don't value necessarily that intergenerational conversation, right? So it just depends on what the cultural nuance is.
All right. Another question's come in. It's actually aimed at Anandita, but I'm going to open it up to everyone and also open the scope of it. The question is, what are some texts, literature that you recommend on the topic of women and art? So I'm going to take this one step further and I'll go around the room and basically say a piece of art or a text or something that you've read or seen that kind of touched you, inspired you, and actually, so we basically give our audience a list of stuff they should check out, which kind of moves you in a different way. So we'll start with you, Anandita. Something that you read and that you recommend on women and art.
So firstly, I would just say #read more women. I think, once you just read more, just consume more by women, even if the content is not about women, you're immediately engaging with, the kind of that space, a different space. But if I have to pick one kind of work, I would actually pick kind of the installations by Shilpa Gupta. I feel she's she's young and very political Indian South Asian artist who's exhibiting widely around the world. And her work is more, very engaged with ideas of censorship and communal hatred, more than just gender, goes beyond. But she had this one work that was really, really powerful that was shown at the Kochi Muzris Biennale, and she's shown it many places around the world, which is works by these 100 censored poets from around the world. And the work is, so you enter a room and it's dark, and you're hearing the audio of these censored works, and each of the works are on this spike. So the room has all these spikes, and there's one poet each on all of that. So I feel it's a global work by an Indian woman artist, and I mean that really moved me, also seeing it in person. So yeah, if I had to pick one work, I would recommend that.
Maina? Currently you're on mute. Sorry, you'll have to unmute yourself. Thank you.
I just said that's really hard to pick one. Really unfair to ask a curator to pick one.
It's something that you want other people, let's put it this way, something that you want to share with other people, saying, hey, based on the conversation we've had today, this is something that I recommend that you should kind of read, or you should kind of see, or whatever.
So I love Shilpa's work. I've actually written about Shilpa and have curated her work in the past. And I think, yes, she's really powerful. But so many of the women artists that I've worked with are so powerful. I'm going to talk about someone who is incredibly well known. And, I could talk about Pina Bausch, or, those are my personal favorites. But I think Meera Nair is someone that whose work I really love. And I think it speaks on one of the things that she does say over and over again is that if we do not tell our own stories, who will tell them for us? Or we're giving the space to someone else to tell them for us. And the thing that I find about Meera, because I've known her for many years also, is that she's very unapologetic about power. And I think women in South Asia have a very conflicted relationship with power. I think we apologize for it all the time, even though we've put in years. And, it's kind of, and I feel that she's a really powerful woman filmmaker. She's a powerful filmmaker, period. And so for that reason, I would say, and she makes her films about everything. From queer issues to stories about everyday life, about marginalization, stereotyping, so many things, So I would say watch Meera's work.
Nishtha?
I think these are the answers you never get from diplomats. It's just a short, wrong question to ask a diplomat. Honestly, I think we're not in the business of recommending. I think all.
But just work that's something that's touched you personally as a non-diplomat, as someone who's right now sitting in probably your drawing room or your bedroom, and you're just saying, "Hey, I want to, I like this. I want someone else to look at that."
We don't give bedroom answers online, so. No, I think honestly, to be very honest, I think we've seen very as UN Women, who's also in my tenure, very invested in using, again, quote unquote, using art for empowering mind and instigating change. Everything has its own power, has its own moment. And I'm going to just take a minute to tell you about a very simple photo exhibition that we did. There was a photo exhibition of 14 Muslim women who had a hand in making India. And there was this little, she was not little, I think she was 12 or 13, and she walked into the photo exhibition with her mother. And she saw she walked by, and then she stopped at this particular picture of this woman who was a scientist. And her mother was reading out the description to her, and she said, "Oh my God, she's a scientist. And look at her, she's so beautiful." And she looked at her mother and she said, "Mom, look at her jewelry." And for in that one moment, we had realized that art had given her a personal space to reconcile, that you could wear jewelry, be a scientist, be a woman, be beautiful. You don't have to look, you don't need to particularly have curly hair and look different to be a scientist. And that's what I said. The philosophy of art, it gives you that space to reconcile between what the world has dictated to you as truths that cannot coexist. And to me, so something as simple as a photo exhibition has been as powerful as a more sophisticated form of art. So honestly, it's not that I don't want to, but I don't think I'm in a space to recommend a particular piece of work. Everything has empowered change and instigated small, big change, but in a way that it's lasting, in a way that policy could not have.
No, I think that's fantastic. Avanti, you're the last one on the list before Asad comes in and kicks us out of this room. So just quickly, either a piece of music or a piece of art or a piece of writing that just you want to share with people and say this kind of captures something.
I don't know if all watching or listening have seen this, but there is a beautiful TED Talk by Chimamanda Adichie. I can put her name and the spelling in the chat box if that's useful. And it's called The Danger of a Single Story. And, she's kind of looking at from a racial lens or, an international and a Western perspective. But I think that's true across whether that is women or any other kinds of marginalized identities. So I would highly recommend that. And then I would also recommend Emma Watson's speech at the 2014 He for She conference at the UN, because for the longest time and bizarre reasons, feminism has received a bad rap, right? And people think, oh, if feminists are it's portrayal of the angry feminist. But the idea of feminism or any movement like that is that we essentially all want to be out of the structures of structural oppression, right? And so I think she's elucidated that very beautifully. So those are two.
All right. Thank you very much, all everyone. This has really been fun. This could go on for hours, and I hope for a time where we can actually all do this in person, probably with a live audience, maybe at the Opera House or someplace like that, where we can just chat and hug and is the point. So thank you very, very much, everyone. And now I will hand it over back to Asad.
Thank you, Kwasar. I mean, and these wonderful speakers for sharing your insights and perspective. Guys, this is my fan moment. I have worked or been associated with each one of you all in different capacities. And we cherry picked this panel, to be honest, and it is one of the things I'm most proud of, not just because I'm sitting behind a pink wall and wearing a pink shirt. So let's start with that. And I'm going to start, I'm going to start with Avanti. And, I met her at a FICCI Flow panel that we both were on. And I was just so impressed, not that we both went to school in Boston, but that was one common connection. But what she is doing with her music and what she's doing with the young, and coming to FICCI Flow, Lubaina and Jayashree, thank you for partnering with us. We are regular partners of them. Maina, we've known each other from our New York days. I mean, we'll date ourselves and age ourselves by saying how long we know each other. But, you mentioned Neera Nair, there's Arun Shivdasani, who taught me, I think my fundamentals of arts and arts management and my love and passion, most of it, I always say, came from her, because we were these lowly volunteers at her festivals and all these events in our young days when we just graduated and worked for a living and then did this on the side. Luckily, we graduated to doing this for a living. Nishta, I mean, we've done so many things together. I mean, Nishta and a common friend, Vibha, we launched her film. We had Madame Fumzali Mwaka come to the Royal Opera House. We've done panel discussions. I mean, I'm always a fan of what Nishta does, and she's such a strong supporter. And Anandita, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but we supported one of your panels at Jaipur Lit Fest with Sonjoy, who's technically my mentor, but he doesn't like being called that because he claims to be younger than me. He is not. But just, you mentioned Shilpa Gupta and her installation, and the installation called Someone Else. We actually, I mean, when I met Shilpa once in her studio and I sat and she showed me all her work, and I fell in love with that installation, and I actually managed to bring that installation into the Times Lit Fest that Bachi and Amita did in the Mehboob Studios. Like dates, I forget. And second last but not the least, the Canadian Consulate, Maithili and Amanda. I mean, I think I've had my little association with International Day of the Girl Child since I think 2015 when I think around then, Maithili was trying to keep me in check. But, kudos to your guys for, championing, spearheading, and chaperoning this. And last but not the least, Kwasar, you're not just the token male on this panel. You were chosen very strategically because, I have known Kwasar for many years, through his family when I used to visit India, and I've always been a fan. We worked through Lit Live and so many other things. So for me, it's been one of the most fulfilling panels we've put together. It's not just by default, but it's a method to the madness, as I would like to say. So, but most of all, thank you to this audience for joining in. And, it's been a fascinating discussion. Avid doesn't sleep like Maina, who spams me at 5 a.m. We have lots more interesting programs coming up. Our next session is The Making of Coral Woman, which is my next passion project, which you all will hear about, which is next week on October 14th. Along with, we're celebrating Simrosa and looking at the construct of the art galleries the following week. So stay tuned, just stalk us on social media, follow us on our website, and just remember that learning never stops. Thank you so much to all of you all for this fascinating discussion, and have a lovely evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.